Ilara's hands remained steady, a stark contrast to the tremor of outrage that had seized the opulent dining room. She faced the imperious billionaire, a man whose fortune was matched only by his contempt, a man who had declared that no one in this glass and steel tower, this monument to American excess, could possibly comprehend the soul of true Arabic coffee. He was wrong, and by the fourth step of a 7-part ritual, she had learned at her grandmother's knee the man who called himself Alistair Finch would be weeping for the boy he had abandoned half a century ago, the boy whose mother had performed this very ceremony as a prayer in a language he had forced himself to forget. The silence that descended upon the pinnacle was absolute, a vacuum created by the force of one man's fury. Perched on the 95th floor of a Chicago skyscraper, the restaurant was a jewel box of glittering city lights and hushed conversations. But now, servers were frozen in place, their silver trays held like shields. Diners lowered their crystal glasses, their hushed gossip silenced. Even the distant, mournful saxophone of the jazz quartet in the lounge seemed to have been swallowed by the void. Every eye was fixed on the corner booth, a throne of plush leather occupied by Alistair Finch and his court. Is this a joke? Finch's voice was not loud, but it was honed to a razor's edge, slicing through the curated elegance. He gestured with a dismissive flick of his wrist at the delicate, gold-rimmed coffee service before him. I requested traditional Arabic coffee. Kwawa. Not this filtered brown water in a French press. This is an insult to my guest and an insult to my intelligence. Ilara stood a respectful 5 feet away, her posture perfect, her hands clasped behind the small of her back in her starched black uniform. Beneath the simple embroidered name tag that read Ilara, her heart hammered a frantic rhythm against her ribs. At 22, she was juggling a full course load in cultural anthropology at the University of Chicago, with 40 hours a week at the pinnacle. This job, with its breathtaking views and equally breathtaking prices, was her lifeline, the only thing keeping her and her younger brother afloat in the tiny apartment they'd shared since their grandmother passed 8 months ago. She had served tech moguls who tipped with stock options and political figures who spoke in coded whispers. But she had never encountered a guest like Alistair Finch. The name was a thunderclap in the world of finance. Finch was a titan of private equity, a man who bought and sold companies like chess pieces, leaving a trail of shuttered factories and hollowed-out towns in his wake. The tabloids called him the Vulture of LaSalle Street, a ruthless predator who had amassed a fortune so vast it was almost abstract. Tonight, he was hosting a single, vital guest, Mr. Faisal Ibrahim, a distinguished, silver-haired man from the Emirates, whose quiet demeanor belied his own considerable influence in global trade. Finch was clearly courting him, and the performance was as much for his guest's benefit as it was a genuine display of his own ego. The restaurant's general manager, a perpetually flustered man named Mr. Davies, scurried over, his face pale and beaded with sweat. Mr. Finch, my deepest apologies. A misunderstanding, I assure you. You can do nothing. Finch cut him off, his cold, pale blue eyes never leaving Ilara's face. It was a calculated act of humiliation, deflecting his anger from management onto the most powerless person present. I want someone who understands the culture, not someone who learned service from a corporate training video. I spent a decade building my first ventures in the Gulf. I know what authenticity looks like. And this, he sneered, pointing at Ilara, this is a child who probably thinks culture is a hashtag. A hot flush of shame and anger crept up Ilara's neck. She could feel the pitying stares of the other diners, the nervous energy of her co-workers. She wanted to disappear, to melt into the plush carpeting. But then She thought of her Teta Amira. She thought of their small, sun-drenched kitchen in Pilsen, the air thick with the scent of cardamom, and stories of a village in the Levant she had never seen. Teta Amira had been her anchor, her world, after her parents were lost in a fog-shrouded car accident on Lakeshore Drive when she was 10. Every afternoon, as the sun slanted through their window, Teta would perform the ritual of making coffee. It was never just a beverage. It was a lesson, a meditation, a communion. "The coffee holds our history, Habibti," her grandmother would say, her hands gnarled with arthritis but endlessly graceful, guiding Alara through each step. "It connects us to the generations before. In this ritual, we honor our guests, we honor our ancestors, and we honor ourselves. Do not ever forget the steps. They are a map back to who you are." Alara had not learned this from a textbook. She had absorbed it through her skin, through smell and sound and touch. She had learned it from the woman who had painstakingly kept their heritage alive, a vibrant flame in the heart of a city of concrete and steel. And now, standing before this arrogant man who wore his superficial knowledge of her culture like a weapon, Alara made a choice. It was a terrifying, reckless choice, but it felt like the only one she could make. She took a single deliberate step forward. She raised her chin, her dark brown eyes meeting Finch's icy gaze. Her voice, when she spoke, was quiet, but it resonated with a dignity that filled the cavernous silence. "Sir, if you will allow me, I can prepare authentic Arabic coffee for you, the traditional way." The silence that followed Alara's offer was heavier, more profound than before. Alistair Finch's perfectly sculpted eyebrows arched in disbelief, which quickly morphed into a cruel, condescending amusement. His other associates, two younger men in identical sharp suits, exchanged smirks. Mr. Ibrahim, however, remained impassive, his dark, intelligent eyes studying Alara with an unreadable expression. "You?" Finch's laugh was a dry, rasping sound. "A waitress? What could you possibly know about it? Did you watch a YouTube video?" Mr. Davies rushed forward again, his hands fluttering nervously. "Mr. Finch, please, this is highly irregular. Alara is an excellent server, but perhaps our executive chef—" "I know the 7-step ritual," Alara said, her voice gaining strength. She looked directly at Finch, her gaze unwavering. "I know it the way my grandmother taught me, and the way her grandmother taught her. I know the meaning of each gesture. If you truly spent a decade in the Gulf, sir, you will recognize the truth of it when you see it." A flicker of something, surprise, annoyance, memory, crossed Finch's face. He leaned back, steepling his long, manicured fingers. "The 7-step ritual," he repeated slowly, tasting the words. "Most people who claim to know just boil some grounds with cardamom. They don't know there are steps." "Most people don't know a great many things," Alara replied, her voice soft but firm. "That does not make the knowledge less real for those who carry it." The tension in the air was thick enough to taste. The other diners had given up all pretense of not listening. This was no longer just a disgruntled customer. It was a drama unfolding on the 95th floor. Mr. Ibrahim had leaned forward ever so slightly, his attention now fully captured. Finally, Finch gave a languid, dismissive wave of his hand. "Very well. Indulge me. Perform your little play. But be warned," he added, his voice dropping to a menacing purr. "If this is anything less than perfect, if you are simply another pretender, I will not only ensure you never work in this city again, I will make you a cautionary tale for every restaurant that dares to call itself fine dining." Alara gave a single, sharp nod, the knot in her stomach tightening into a cold, hard stone of resolve. She turned to the terrified Mr. Davies. "I will need certain things from the kitchen. Green, unroasted coffee beans, Yemeni, if we have them, whole green cardamom pods, a traditional brass dalla, or at least a proper long-spouted pot. I will also need a mimaz for roasting, a mortar and pestle, a heavy one, and small, handleless cups, finjan." Davies blinked, his mouth agape at the specific, esoteric list. I have no idea if we possess such items. Our clientele is international," Ilara pressed, a new authority in her voice. "Check the specialty pantry, the one reserved for state dinners. If we cater to the world, we should have the tools of the world." Something in her quiet certainty, in the sheer audacity of her stance, seemed to shake Davies from his paralysis. He nodded, a flicker of admiration in his eyes. "Go, I will inform the chef. I will manage things out here." As Ilara turned and walked toward the swinging doors of the kitchen, she could feel the weight of every stare on her back. Her legs felt like lead, but she forced her spine to remain straight, her stride measured and calm. She wasn't just a waitress anymore. She was the defender of her Teta Amira's memory. "Remember, Habibti," her grandmother's voice echoed in her mind, a warm and steadying presence. "The coffee is not a drink. It is a welcome. It is respect. It is a bridge between souls. Do not rush. Let every step breathe with its own meaning." The kitchen was a symphony of controlled chaos, the hiss of the grill, the clang of pans, the clipped calls of the expediter. The executive chef, Antoine Dubois, a formidable Frenchman with a temper as fiery as his sauces, looked up as she entered. His eyes narrowed. Davies called. "He said you are making coffee for Finch? Are you insane, ma petite?" "I need the specialty pantry, chef," she said, her voice even. "He challenged me. He said no one here understands tradition." Dubois let out a low whistle, wiping his hands on his apron. "That man is a piranha in a $1,000 suit. He enjoys the taste of blood. You are very brave, or very foolish." He paused, studying her for a long moment. "The pantry is in the back. Key is on the hook. Take what you need." Then he added, almost under his breath, "And make him eat his words." The specialty pantry was a treasure trove, a small, climate-controlled room filled with ingredients from every corner of the globe. Her hands, guided by memory, moved with purpose. She found a vacuum-sealed bag of pale green coffee beans from the Haraz Mountains of Yemen. She found a jar of fragrant, whole green cardamom pods. And then, on a high shelf, covered in a thin layer of dust, she saw it. A magnificent, handcrafted brass dalla, its surface intricately etched, its spout curved like the neck of a swan. Tucked beside it was a matching brass mihmas, the long-handled pan for roasting, and a heavy, solid brass mortar and pestle. It was a complete, authentic set, likely purchased for a visiting dignitary, and then forgotten. As her fingers closed around the cool, heavy brass, a profound sense of calm settled over her. These were not just utensils. They were artifacts of her heritage. They were Teta Amira's hands, guiding her own. Chef Dubois appeared at her side, holding out a small, portable butane burner. "You cannot use the main range. It will disrupt the entire service. Use this. The prep station in the far corner is clear. I will keep the others away." Ilara looked at him, surprised by the unexpected alliance. He offered a rare, tight-lipped smile. "I am from Lyon. My grandmother taught me to make a coq au vin that would make angels weep. I understand the sacredness of a grandmother's recipe. Now go. Show that arrogant pig what real culture looks like." At the quiet corner prep station, Ilara arranged the items on a rolling service cart. The brass dalla and mihmas, the green beans, the cardamom pods, the small stack of porcelain finjan cups she had found. Each object was placed with intention, creating a small, sacred space amidst the kitchen's clamour. This too was part of the ritual, the preparation, the order, the respect for the tools. She closed her eyes, taking a deep, centering breath. She wasn't in the pinnacle anymore. She was back in the small kitchen in Pilsen. She could hear the soft murmur of the Arabic radio station Teta always played. She could smell the jasmine blooming in the window box. She could feel the steady, loving presence of the woman who had taught her that strength was not about being loud, but about being rooted. "Are you ready?" Dubois asked softly from a few feet away. Elara opened her eyes. The fear was gone, replaced by a quiet, unshakable purpose. "The ritual must be performed in front of the guest," she said. "It is a sign of honor. I need to take this out there." Dubois helped her secure everything on the cart. As she pushed it through the swinging doors and back into the dining room, the silence returned, immediate and absolute. Alistair Finch sat like a stone effigy, his arms crossed, his face a mask of bored skepticism. Mr. Ibrahim, however, watched her approach with an intensity that made her feel seen, truly seen, for the first time that night. Elara positioned the cart beside Finch's table in the open space where everyone could witness the ceremony. She did not speak. She did not look at the expectant faces. She simply began. "The first step," she said, her voice clear and carrying in the stillness, "is hamas, the roasting." She held up the mihmas, the long-handled brass pan, and poured in a small measure of the pale green coffee beans. "The beans must be roasted fresh for the guest," she explained, her voice a soft, melodic counterpoint to the room's tension. "It is the first gift, the gift of time, of effort. It says, 'You are worthy of this labor.'" She ignited the burner, the small flame hissing to life. She held the pan over the heat, beginning to stir the beans with a long brass spoon in a slow, rhythmic, circular motion. The first scent that arose was green and earthy, unfamiliar to most in the room. Then, as the heat penetrated the beans, the smell began to transform, becoming nutty, then toasty. Her wrist moved with a fluid, practiced grace, a motion repeated thousands of times in her grandmother's kitchen. She listened intently. Teta had taught her that the beans speak to you. You must listen for their first crack, a subtle pop that signals the release of their oils and the beginning of their transformation. "My Teta used to say that roasting the beans is like listening to a person's story," Elara said, her eyes focused on the pan. "You must be patient. You must give it your full attention. If you rush, the story is bitter and burnt. If you are timid, it is weak and undeveloped. You must find the balance." Out of the corner of her eye, she saw Finch uncross his arms. He had leaned forward slightly, his cynical smirk replaced by a guarded curiosity. Mr. Ibrahim had a faint, almost imperceptible smile on his lips. He recognized this. This was real. The beans began to pop, a soft, percussive sound like quiet applause. Their color deepened from pale green to cinnamon, then to a rich, warm brown. A fragrant, clean smoke wafted from the pan, filling the air with an aroma that was ancient and intoxicating. With an instinct born of deep familiarity, she pulled the pan from the flame at the precise moment of perfection. The roast is complete when the soul of the bean is awakened, but not scorched, she said, pouring the hot, fragrant beans onto a small brass plate to cool. She set them aside and reached for the heavy mortar and pestle. The second step. Tarn. The grinding. She placed a handful of the cooled beans into the mortar, adding several whole green cardamom pods. She raised the heavy brass pestle. The first strike echoed through the silent dining room with a resonant, authoritative thunk. Thunk, 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 thunk. She fell into the rhythm her Teta had taught her, a complex, musical beat that was both a tool for grinding and a form of communication. "The sound of the grinding is an announcement," she explained, her arm moving with tireless precision. "It tells the household and the neighbors that coffee is being prepared, that hospitality is being offered. It is an open invitation." The cardamom pods burst, releasing a wave of sweet, spicy fragrance that mingled with the aroma of the coffee. The beans shattered, then crumbled, breaking down into a coarse, uniform powder. A fine sheen of sweat appeared on her brow, but her rhythm never faltered. The sound was primal, hypnotic. It filled the sterile, modern room with something ancient and alive. Alistair Finch's jaw was clenched. His pale eyes were fixed on the mortar, on her hands. The mask of indifference was gone, replaced by an expression of intense, almost painful concentration. He looked like a man trying to remember the lyrics to a song he hadn't heard since childhood. Finally she stopped. The grind was perfect. Fine, but with enough texture to allow the flavors to bloom without turning to sludge. She held up the mortar for the guests to see. The grind must be consistent, a partnership between the coffee and the spice, she said. She carefully tipped the fragrant powder into the belly of the magnificent brass dala. The third step, tapk, the brewing. She filled the dala with cold, filtered water from a pitcher, measuring by eye. She placed the pot directly on the burner's flame. "We do not boil the water first," she explained, her voice taking on the cadence of a teacher. "The coffee and water must come to temperature together. They must learn to live with one another. This is the secret to a brew that is strong but not bitter." She watched the pot with unwavering focus as the liquid began to warm. The combined fragrance of coffee and cardamom now filled the entire room, a rich, complex perfume that seemed to tell a story all its own. The liquid began to foam and rise within the dala's long neck. "Now, the most delicate part," she said softly. "The coffee must be allowed to rise to the very edge of boiling, but never cross it. We must do this 3 times. 3 is a number of balance and completion." The foam surged upwards, threatening to overflow. At the last possible second, with a movement of pure instinct, she lifted the dala from the flame. The foam subsided. She returned it to the heat. Across the room, an older woman at another table, dressed in a shimmering sari, pressed a hand to her heart, her eyes glistening with tears of recognition. The coffee rose a second time. Again, Elara pulled it away with perfect timing. A muscle was twitching in Alistair Finch's cheek. His breathing was shallow. He looked transfixed, trapped by the ritual. The third rise began. The foam, now a rich, dark crema, climbed the neck of the pot. With a final, graceful motion, she removed the dala from the heat and placed it on a trivet on her cart. "Now, we allow it to rest," she said. "The grounds must settle. We give it a moment of peace. Patience is the final ingredient." While the coffee settled, Elara arranged the small, handleless finjan cups on a serving tray. They were delicate, almost translucent, painted with fine blue and gold patterns. The silence in the room was now one of reverence. The performance of a sneering billionaire had been completely eclipsed by the quiet, dignified ceremony of a young waitress. After a moment, she lifted the dala again. Step 4. Sab, the pouring. She held the pot high, a good 18 inches above the first tiny cup. Then, with a hand as steady as a surgeon's, she tilted it. A thin, unbroken stream of dark, steaming coffee flowed from the long spout, falling in a perfect, silent arc into the center of the cup. Not a single drop was spilled. The stream was so fine it looked like a thread of dark silk. She filled the cup only a third of the way, as tradition dictated. Without breaking the stream, she moved in a graceful, flowing motion to the next cup, and the next, and the next. It was a display of breathtaking skill and control. When she was finished, 7 small cups sat on the tray, each filled to the exact same level. She lifted the tray. Step 5. Takdim, the serving. Her eyes scanned the table. Finch was the host, the man of power. His 2 associates sat beside him, but her gaze settled on Mr. Ibrahim, the elder, the honored guest. She walked to him first. "In the tradition of my grandmother's house," she said, her voice resonating with quiet authority, "we serve the eldest first. We honor wisdom before wealth. We honor years before power." Mr. Ibrahim's eyes widened. A deep, profound emotion washed over his face. His hand trembled slightly as he accepted the small cup. "Shukran," he murmured, his voice thick. "Thank you. I have not been shown this respect in this country in a very long time." Alara inclined her head. She served the others, moving around the table according to age, leaving Alistair Finch for second to last. When she finally stood before him and extended the tray, she saw that his hands were visibly shaking. His face was ashen. He reached for the cup, his fingers hesitating. "There is a way to hold it," he said, his voice a hoarse whisper. Alara nodded. "Step 6. Imsak, the holding." She picked up one of the remaining cups, demonstrating. She held it with her right hand, her thumb and forefinger pinching the rim, allowing the bottom to rest in her palm. "The cup has no handle to force you to be present," she explained. "You must feel its warmth. You must hold it with care and intention. It is a reminder to be mindful." With a tremor he could not conceal, Finch picked up his cup, mimicking her grip perfectly. The others followed his lead. "And now," Alara said, taking the final cup for herself, "the last step before we drink." She brought the cup to her nose, inhaling the rich aroma. Then she tilted it slightly, in a gesture of offering toward Mr. Ibrahim, then toward each person at the table, and finally toward Finch. "Step 7, she said, her voice barely more than a whisper. "Tahia," the greeting. She repeated the gesture, speaking the words her teta had taught her, words that were a blessing. "Bismillah. May this coffee bring you peace. May it remind you of home." The word home was the key. It unlocked something deep inside Alistair Finch, a door that had been sealed shut for decades. A strangled sound escaped his lips. The carefully constructed dam of his composure, built over 50 years of relentless ambition, shattered. He brought the cup to his lips, took a single small sip. The taste, the aroma, the ritual, it was too much. The cup rattled in its saucer as he set it down. He covered his face with his hands, and his broad, impeccably tailored shoulders began to shake with silent, racking sobs. Alistair Finch, the vulture of LaSalle Street, the titan of industry, was weeping like a lost child. The vast dining room on the 95th floor was suspended in a state of collective shock. Alistair Finch's associates stared, mouths agape, utterly unprepared for this raw display of emotion from their cold, calculating leader. Mr. Ibrahim watched him, not with surprise, but with a deep, sorrowful understanding. Alara stood by the table, the serving tray held in her hands, her purpose fulfilled. There was no sense of victory, no gloating satisfaction. There was only a profound, aching empathy for the broken man before her. She recognized the shape of his grief. It was the same grief she felt for her grandmother, a sorrow born from the irreversible finality of loss. "Sir," she said softly, placing the tray on her service cart. "Shall I leave you?" "No," Finch choked out from behind his hands. His voice was raw, unrecognizable. He slowly lowered his hands, revealing a face stripped of its power and arrogance. His eyes were red-rimmed, his cheeks wet with tears. In that moment, he looked not like a billionaire, but like an old, tired man, burdened by a weight no amount of money could lift. "No, please," he repeated. "Don't go. You need to. I need to." He fumbled for his coffee cup, his hand still trembling, and cradled it as if it were a holy relic. When he spoke again, his voice was a ragged whisper that commanded the absolute attention of everyone nearby. "My name. It wasn't always Alistair Finch," he began, his eyes fixed on the steam rising from the tiny cup. "I was born a mere Khalil, in a small village in Jordan, a place that probably doesn't even exist on a map anymore. My father was a stone cutter. My mother made our house a home. And every afternoon, when my father returned from the quarry, she would make coffee. Exactly like you just did." He took a shaky breath, the memories flooding back, overwhelming him. I can still hear it, the sound of the pestle in the mortar. Thunk, 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 thunk. It was the rhythm of my childhood. It meant my father was home. It meant we were safe. It meant we were a family. Mr. Ibrahim quietly spoke in Arabic, a soft, encouraging phrase. Finch nodded, a flicker of gratitude in his tormented eyes. When I was 18, a group of American engineers came to our region. They were building a pipeline. I was the only boy in the village who had taught himself English, reading from discarded books and listening to an old shortwave radio. They hired me as a translator. An opportunity. A way out. He stared down into his cup, as if seeing his own reflection from a lifetime ago. The head engineer, a man named Finch, took a liking to me. He saw my ambition. He offered to sponsor me, to bring me to America, to give me an education. I saw it as a miracle, a chance to escape the dust and the poverty, to become someone. I promised my mother I would write every week. I promised I would send money. The silence that followed the first sob was not empty. It was dense, supersaturated with the suspended disbelief of 200 people. It was a sacred silence, the kind found in ancient libraries or deep woods, where the air itself seems to hold its breath. The clinking of cutlery, the murmur of conversation, the distant, melancholic saxophone, all had been extinguished, not by command, but by the sheer, gravitational pull of a man's soul cracking open. Alistair Finch, a man who moved markets with a whisper, was utterly undone by the scent of coffee. His associates, two men who looked as though they had been sculpted from the same block of polished ambition, were frozen in a state of horrified paralysis. Their faces, usually masks of cool competence, were slack with a kind of second-hand shame and confusion. This raw, unfiltered grief was a language they didn't speak. It was a variable that had no place on their spreadsheets. Only Mr. Faisal Ibrahim seemed to comprehend the magnitude of the moment. He rose from his seat with the unhurried grace of a man accustomed to navigating the turbulent waters of human emotion. He placed a steadying hand on Finch's trembling shoulder, a simple gesture of solidarity that seemed to anchor the weeping man in the storm of his own memory. He murmured something in Arabic, a phrase too low for Ilara to catch, but its tone was that of a brother, a father, a friend. It was a sound of comfort in a shared tongue. Ilara stood rooted to her spot beside the service cart. The magnificent brass dalla was still warm in her hand. There was no triumph in her, no vindictive satisfaction. The anger that had propelled her into this reckless act had long since evaporated, replaced by a vast, aching empathy. She had intended to expose a hypocrite, to defend her Teta's memory. She had not intended to excavate a man's 40-year-old tomb of regret. She felt like an intruder, a witness to a grief too private for this public stage. The ritual her grandmother had taught her was a bridge between souls. She had built the bridge, and now this broken man was staggering across it, returning to a self he had tried to murder. Slowly, with a shuddering effort that seemed to cost him everything, Finch lifted his head. His face was a ruin. The sharp, predatory lines had dissolved, leaving behind the puffy, blotched visage of a lost boy. His pale blue eyes, usually so cold and piercing, were now flooded with a pain so profound it was almost elemental. He looked at Ilara, and in his gaze she saw not a titan of industry, but a mere Khalil, the stonecutter's son. "You," he began, his voice a ragged, broken thing. "You gave her back to me. Just for a moment. I could smell the jasmine from her window. I could feel the sun on the stone floor." He gestured feebly at the tiny cup, his hand shaking so violently he could not lift it. "This isn't just coffee. It's the sound of my mother's love." He finally looked away from Ilara, his gaze falling upon his two stunned associates. A flicker of the old Alistair Finch returned, a bitter, self-lacerating irony. "Don't look so shocked, boys. This is what happens when you sell your soul for a corner office. You forget what it was worth in the first place." He then turned his eyes to Mr. Ibrahim. "Forgive me, Faisal. This is an unforgivable display. I have insulted you and ruined our evening." Mr. Ibrahim shook his head, his expression one of deep compassion. "Amir," he said, using the name with gentle deliberation, "you have done the opposite. For months, we have talked of logistics, of tariffs, of profit margins. Tonight, for the first time, we have spoken of what is real. This young woman," he inclined his head respectfully toward Ilara, "has given us a gift far more valuable than any contract. She has given us a moment of truth." The truth hung in the air, fragrant and undeniable as the cardamom. The other diners were no longer just spectators. They were participants in this shared moment of humanity. An older woman in a shimmering sari at a nearby table quietly dabbed her eyes with a napkin. A stern-looking man in a banker's suit stared into his wine glass as if it held the answers to his own forgotten histories. Ilara had not just served a table. She had served the entire room, a potent reminder of the things they had lost, the people they had left behind, the languages they had forgotten. Mr. Davies, the manager, finally unfroze. He scurried forward, his face a canvas of conflicting emotions, terror at the scene, awe at Ilara's power, and a dawning realization that this catastrophe might somehow be a miracle. "Mr. Finch, Ilara, is there anything? Can I—" He trailed off, utterly out of his depth. Finch ignored him. He pushed himself to his feet, his movements stiff and uncertain, like a man testing his legs after a long illness. He was still a tall, imposing figure, but the aura of invincibility was gone, replaced by a fragile, almost brittle vulnerability. He took a step toward Ilara. "I owe you more than an apology," he said, his voice gaining a semblance of its former strength, though the rasp of unshed tears remained. "An apology is a word. What you did was a resurrection. I was cruel. I was arrogant. I used my power to humiliate you because I was terrified of the memory you represented, and you met my cruelty not with fear, but with grace, with a truth so pure it burned me to the ground." He stopped before her. "What is your name?" "Ilara," she replied, her own voice quiet but steady. "Ilara," he repeated, the name a strange new sound on his tongue. "I will not forget it." He reached into the inner pocket of his immaculate suit jacket, his hand emerging not with a wallet, but with a single, heavy card embossed with stark, minimalist lettering. "This is my private, direct line. I need to speak with you again. Not here. Not like this. As one person to another. Please, there are things I need to understand." Before Ilara could even process the request, Mr. Ibrahim also stepped forward, a warm, genuine smile gracing his lips. He too produced a card, this one bearing the elegant crest of a philanthropic foundation. "And this is mine, Ilara," he said, his voice resonating with deep respect. "The Ibrahim Global Heritage Foundation has a mandate to support what we call cultural custodians, young individuals who carry the light of their traditions into the future. It is a rare and precious thing to witness such wisdom in one so young. We would be deeply honored to fund the entirety of your university education through your doctorate, should you choose to pursue it. The world is in desperate need of scholars who understand that culture is not an artifact to be studied, but a life to be lived." Ilara stared at the two cards in her hand. One, a stark black rectangle, represented a past clawing its way toward redemption. The other, an elegant cream square, represented a future she had never, in her wildest dreams, allowed herself to imagine. The weight of them, the sheer impossibility of them, felt immense. Tears pricked her own eyes, tears of shock, of overwhelming gratitude, and of a sharp, piercing sorrow for the one person she desperately wished she could share this with. "Teta, do you see this?" She looked up from the cards, past the two powerful men, past the stunned onlookers, to the service cart, to the brass dollar, its surface gleaming under the restaurant's soft lights. It was her anchor in this surreal sea. It was real. It was her grandmother's love made manifest. She drew a steadying breath. "Thank you," she said, her voice clear and composed. "Thank you both. But the service is not yet complete." She turned to the table, where the tiny, untouched cups of coffee still sat. "The coffee is getting cold." The bus ride home was a journey between worlds. Ilara sat by the window, the two cards held tightly in her hand, their sharp corners pressing into her palm. Outside, the glittering spires of downtown Chicago slid by, the same buildings she saw every night. But tonight they looked different. They seemed less like monuments of power, and more like hollow, glittering shells. The real power, she was beginning to understand, was in the things you couldn't see, the rhythm of a pestle, the scent of a spice, the weight of a memory. She got off at her stop in Pilsen and walked the familiar 3 blocks to her apartment building. The air here smelled of life, of frying onions from one apartment, of laundry detergent from another, of the faint, sweet perfume of the community garden down the street. It was the antithesis of the sterile, climate-controlled perfection of the 95th floor. It was home. Her younger brother, Leo, was sprawled on the couch, headphones on, furiously tapping a controller. At 17, he was a creature of modern America, more fluent in the lore of video games than in the stories of his ancestors. He looked up as she came in, pulling off his headphones. "Whoa, you're late," he said. "Rough night? Did some rich guy complain his steak wasn't massaged by angels?" Ilara managed a weak smile, dropping her bag and kicking off her sensible work shoes. The exhaustion hit her like a physical blow. Something like that. Leo's joking demeanor faded as he saw her face. "Hey, you okay? You look like you've seen a ghost." "Ghosts," she corrected softly, sinking into the worn armchair that had been their grandmother's favorite. "I've seen ghosts." She told him everything. She told him about Alistair Finch's arrogance, the challenge, the terror that had gripped her. She described the ritual, step by step, and as she spoke, she could feel the phantom weight of the mimos in her hand, hear the resonant thunk of the pestle. She told him about the billionaire's breakdown, about the confession, about Amir Khalil, the boy he had buried. And then, her hand trembling slightly, she opened her palm and showed Leo the 2 cards. He stared at them, his eyes wide. He took Mr. Ibrahim's card, reading the words Global Heritage Foundation aloud. Then he looked at the other, simpler card. Alistair Finch? The vulture of LaSalle Street? That. Alistair Finch. He whistled, a long, low sound of disbelief. "Elara, this is insane. A full ride for your PhD. A private line to one of the richest guys on the planet. What are you going to do?" "I don't know," she confessed, her voice barely a whisper. She felt dizzy, overwhelmed. "It doesn't feel real." "It's real," Leo said, his voice filled with a fierce, protective pride. "You did what Teta always taught you to do. You stood up for who we are. You didn't just make coffee, Elara. You threw a truth bomb into the fanciest restaurant in the city." He grinned. Teta would be so proud. The words, meant to comfort, brought a fresh wave of grief. Ilara's eyes welled up. "I just wish she was here to see it," she whispered, the tears finally falling. Leo came and sat on the arm of the chair, putting an arm around her shoulders. "She's here," he said quietly, gesturing around the small, cozy apartment, filled with their grandmother's things, the embroidered cushions, the worn Arabic storybooks, the faint, lingering scent of rosewater and cardamom. "She's everywhere." For the next few days, Elara lived in a liminal state. She went to her classes at the university, listening to lectures on kinship systems and ritual theory, but the academic concepts felt pale and lifeless compared to the raw, visceral experience she had lived. She went to work at the Pinnacle, where she was now treated with a mixture of awe and trepidation. Mr. Davies offered her a promotion to captain, which she politely declined. The other servers looked at her differently, as if she possessed some strange and unpredictable magic. The corner booth where Finch had sat remained empty, a silent testament to the night the restaurant's perfect facade had been shattered. The 2 business cards sat on the small table beside her bed. They felt like artifacts from another life, heavy with the weight of impossible choices. The scholarship was a dream, a pathway to a life of scholarship she had thought was years of debt and struggle away. But Finch's card, that was a mystery, a question mark. What did he want from her? Absolution? Advice? She was a 22-year-old student. What could she possibly offer a man like him? The thought of calling him filled her with a profound anxiety. On the 4th night, unable to sleep, she got up and went into the kitchen. The moon cast a silvery light through the window, illuminating the small room where her Teta had taught her everything. On a shelf, beside a jar of bay leaves, sat her grandmother's own Dala. It was smaller than the one from the restaurant, made of worn, dented copper, not gleaming brass. It was humble, but it was hers. She took it down, its familiar weight a comfort in her hands. On impulse, she decided to perform the ritual, just for herself. She took out the green beans, the cardamom. She lit the small flame on the stove. But as she began to roast the beans in a simple skillet, the motion felt different. It was no longer just a private meditation. The memory of Finch's weeping face was superimposed over the memory of her grandmother's smile. The ritual was no longer just about honoring her past. It was now inextricably linked to his. It had become a tool, a weapon, a key. It had healed one man and broken him open at the same time. The thought was terrifying. Could she ever reclaim it as her own? The next morning, with the scent of coffee still lingering in the apartment, she made a decision. She picked up her phone, her heart hammering against her ribs, and dialed the number on the black card. It was answered on the first ring. Finch. The voice was curt, clipped, the voice of the billionaire. Ilara's resolve wavered. "Mr. Finch, this is Ilara." There was a pause. When he spoke again, the voice was different. Softer, more tired. "Ilara, thank you for calling. I was hoping you would." "You said you wanted to talk," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. "I do," he said, "but not on the phone, and not in a place like the Pinnacle. Would you be willing to meet me? Somewhere. Normal. Somewhere of your choosing." Ilara thought for a moment. "There's a small cafe near my apartment, La Luz, on 18th Street. I'll find it," he said. "Tomorrow, 10 o'clock. 10 o'clock is fine," she said, and before she could lose her nerve, she ended the call. La Luz was the heart of the neighborhood, a place that smelled of strong coffee, cinnamon, and community. The next morning, Ilara sat at a small table by the window, nursing a mug of café de olla. She watched as a sleek, black town car, so out of place it might as well have been a spaceship, pulled up outside. The man who emerged was not Alistair Finch. He wore simple grey slacks and a dark blue sweater. He looked older, smaller, and profoundly weary. He scanned the street, looking lost, until he saw her through the window. He entered the cafe, and for a moment the comfortable chatter faltered as people took in his expensive but understated presence. He walked to her table, his movements hesitant. "Thank you for meeting me," he said, sitting opposite her. He looked around the vibrant, colourful cafe. "This is nice." "It's real," Ilara said simply. A faint, sad smile touched his lips. "Yes, it is." He ordered a black coffee from the woman behind the counter, who looked at him with open curiosity. When it arrived, he cradled the thick ceramic mug in his hands, much as he had cradled the tiny finjan. "I've spent the last few days on the phone," he began, not looking at her, but staring into his cup. "I found a cousin. He lives in Amman. He told me, my sisters, Salma and Noura, they are still alive. They live in the old village. They have children, grandchildren. They all thought I was dead." He finally looked up, and his eyes were glistening. 40 years, Ilara. For 40 years, my own sisters believed their brother was dead. The sheer weight of that statement settled between them. "I'm flying to Jordan next week," he continued. "I don't know what I will say. How do you apologize for a silence that has lasted a lifetime? But I have to go. I have to stand on that soil again. Not as Alistair Finch. I have to go as Amir Khalil." "I'm glad," Ilara said softly. "I'm glad you're going home." "It's a start," he said. "But that's my journey. I asked you here to talk about yours." He leaned forward, his intensity creating a private space around them in the bustling cafe. "That night, you held up a mirror to me, and I saw a monster. But you also showed me something else. You showed me the power of something I had thrown away. Heritage, tradition, the things that are passed down, hand to hand, heart to heart. The things that have no stock price, no market value, but are the only things that are truly priceless." He slid a simple, unmarked folder across the table. I have spent my life building an empire of hollow things, corporations, holding companies, assets. It's a kingdom of ghosts. I want to build something real, something that lasts. I am establishing a new foundation, a charitable trust. I'm endowing it with an initial $50 million. Ilara stared at him, speechless. Its mission, he went on, his voice gaining passion, will be to find and fund the custodians, the living libraries, the people like your grandmother and like you, the weavers in Peru, the storytellers in Ireland, the boat builders in Polynesia, the calligraphers in Japan, not to put their work in museums behind glass, but to help them keep it alive, to fund apprenticeships, to secure resources, to give them a platform to share their knowledge with the world on their own terms. He pushed the folder closer to her. I don't want to run it. I am a creature of the world I am trying to escape. It needs someone who understands its soul from the inside. It needs someone with integrity, with courage, and with a deep, intuitive understanding of what is truly valuable. It needs you, Ilara. I want you to be its founding executive director. The room seemed to tilt. The sounds of the cafe faded to a dull roar in her ears. Me? She managed to say. Mr. Finch. Amir. I'm 22 years old. I'm a student. I serve coffee for a living. I am not qualified to run a $50 million foundation. You are the only person in the world who is qualified, he countered, his voice firm. Your qualifications are not on a resume. You demonstrated them on the 95th floor. You have the wisdom to see, the courage to act, and the grace to heal. You will build the board. You will write the mission statement. You will set the criteria. Your salary will ensure that you and your brother never have to worry about rent again. And your first official act will be to accept Mr. Ibrahim's grant, so you can complete your education in any way you see fit while you build this institution from the ground up. Her mind was reeling, a torrent of doubt and fear, and a wild, terrifying hope. It was too much. It was impossible. She slowly, hesitantly, opened the folder. On the first page, in clean, simple type, was a proposed name. The Amira Foundation for Living Traditions. The breath left her body in a rush. He had named it for her grandmother. The tears she had been holding back streamed down her face, but they were not tears of grief. They were tears of a possibility so vast and breathtaking it felt like staring into the sun. She thought of her Teta's gnarled hands, guiding her own. She thought of her voice, whispering stories of their village. Her grandmother had not just taught her a ritual. She had taught her a way of being. She had given her a map. Amir watched her, his expression gentle. My mother's name was Layla, he said softly. I am not yet worthy to name anything after her. But your grandmother, Amira, it means princess or leader. It is a fitting name for an organization that will seek to honor the quiet royalty of tradition. Ilara closed the folder, her hands resting on the name. She looked at this man, this stranger who had been her adversary and was now, impossibly, her benefactor. She saw the long road ahead of him, the difficult work of reconciliation with his family and with himself. And she saw her own road, suddenly stretching out before her, no longer a narrow path of survival, but a wide, open highway to a future she had never known how to ask for. She took a deep breath, the air filled with the scent of coffee and cinnamon, the smell of her new life. Okay, she whispered. Yes. Okay. Later that evening, Ilara stood once more in her own kitchen. The folder for the Amira Foundation lay on the counter, beside her Teta's worn copper dala. The city lights twinkled through her window. She picked up the pot, its familiar dents and scratches feeling like a rosary in her hands. She began the ritual, not for a guest, not for a memory, but for the future. She roasted the beans, listening for their first crack, a sound of awakening. She ground them with the cardamom, the rhythmic beat a prayer of gratitude. As she watched the dark liquid rise 3 times in the neck of the pot, she understood. Her Teta had given her a map, not to find her way back to a lost past, but to navigate the path forward. It was a map that taught her how to build bridges between worlds, between generations, between souls. And now she would spend the rest of her life sharing that map, helping 1,000 other people in 1,000 other kitchens find their own way home.